Hi everyone, this is Reverend Josh at Boise First United Church of Christ. We're so glad you've chosen to listen to our sermon this morning. We hope that you find yourself encouraged as we meet you wherever you are on life's journey.
So when I was in seminary, I learned professors expect you to articulate your thoughts about God. I don't mean just in a descriptive way, like I think God is loving and has a sense of humor, both of which are true for me, but in a way that you can frame in a thesis statement and then defend, which I found rather annoying. I realized it shouldn't have surprised me that I was going to have to think critically in graduate school, but I had long ago decided that God was too big and too mysterious to fit inside my brain. My 12-step history had given me a more pragmatic approach. Practice these steps, which includes relying on a higher power or a power greater than yourself. If that reliance helps you to stay sober and live to good purpose, that's the God you need. I learned in seminary, by the way, that we have William James to thank for that, an American philosopher, and he came up with the idea of belief as a working hypothesis and studied the phenomenon of spiritual experience at great length. But here's the thing. For all my resistance to getting specific about spirit, I was there largely in seminary, largely in response to a fault line in my own theology. On an October day in 2016, my dad texted me and my sisters to let us know my mom's diagnosis was Alzheimer's. I wasn't surprised, but I was devastated and lost in some fundamental way that I didn't know how to think or talk about. Theologian Paul Tillich calls God the ground of our being, and for me, that ground had just cracked wide open. Many of you know that I have begun working as a pastor for the Care Collective, a program that serves people with mild to moderate dementia and their caregivers. It will soon be expanding here, as Pastor Irene mentioned, one day a week on Mondays at Boise First. So I figured it was a good time today for me to say something about how Alzheimer's went from being the God please not that thing to being my chosen ministry. Since the words dementia and Alzheimer's are often used interchangeably, I want to clarify that dementia is a group of symptoms that present as deficits in memory, cognition, and social skills, and that can be caused by a variety of different diseases. One-third of adults who live past the age of 65 will eventually have some form of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common. I know many here have experience with this journey already. Maybe for some of you, it's a particularly tender time. I hope this sanctuary is a place for you to be yourself, to honor what you need, and to feel cared for. One thing I learned during my mom's story is that the societal systems are nowhere close to having adequate answers or resources to meet the implications of Alzheimer's, even those with a social location marked by privilege. My parents had health insurance, financial resources, 3 daughters willing to help, and yet we did not have what we needed emotionally, relationally, or theologically to navigate all the changes of that disease. Medicine can be so very helpful, and I pray we do find a cure for Alzheimer's. But once the medical lens is focused on something, it tends to become the whole story. It's easy to forget that these are human experiences: dementia, cancer, organ transplants, birth, death. And they have profound cultural, relational, and spiritual implications. Why I'm talking about Alzheimer's in church is because I think we and other communities of care can help with that. From the book of Isaiah, enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch your tent curtains wide. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords. Strengthen your stakes. We are a big tent denomination. And that can sometimes sound like a simple thing, You just open the door wider. But we know it isn't. Beloved community is often uncomfortable. It's sometimes confusing. It takes courage and effort. Sometimes widening the circle requires inner work as well as a bigger tent. Accepting my mom's Alzheimer's was one of those times for me. Besides 12-step recovery, if I was going to name my biggest influence on my spiritual formation, she would be my mom, Jane Staveau. Mom and I were both meaning makers from the get-go. She wasn't really a crawl in her lap and snuggle mom. Instead, we'd be laying in bed during my nap time. I was a reluctant napper. And she'd say, "What do you think happens after you die?" And it's not like she had an answer at the ready, you know? It may explain why I was primed for existential crises by age 3. But these conversations were also when I felt closest to my mom. Jane's superpower was the ability to author her own story, past and present. I didn't even know until well into my adulthood that she had a difficult childhood due to her own mom's drinking and unhappiness. My mom believed that her freedom came from choosing her own perspective in any given set of circumstances and looking at where she had choices and agency. She often shared this vision with others. When I came home from school, there were almost always people in our house, parenting groups in our kitchen, or environmental book studies in our living room. My mom was a thinker, a gatherer of people, and a leader. Before that, there was a moment about 2 years after my mom's diagnosis that crystallized why Alzheimer's rattled me so. By this time, I had taken leave from my work to help my parents, and I was at their home in a Chicago suburb where my mom grew up. We were sitting in their living room when my mom asked, "Where are we right now?" My dad was getting used to this, and he answered, "We're in our condo in Arlington Heights. This is your home." And she said, "Ron, I'm not a person anymore." My dad quickly reassured her, "Of course you are. You're Jane Staveau." But I had this horrible sinking feeling because I knew what my mom meant. She could not place herself. This was the crux of my spiritual crisis. What happens when your meaning-making apparatus fails? Where is your freedom then? Before this, Alzheimer's was in the circle of things I tried hard to not think about. But now that it was inside my own mom's brain, it became an unsolvable, tragic riddle. Where was hope if you lost the ability to choose or even see that you have a choice? What if I lost my ability to write and share stories? That is how I make my way through the world, how I stay connected to God, how I stay sober, how I find the ground beneath my feet. In Romans, Paul writes, "For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of Christ Jesus our Lord." I notice Paul did not include Alzheimer's in that list, and while I understand it should be covered by things like anything else in creation, at that time, I could not see how that mattered. Does God matter in my life if I no longer remember God, no longer remember myself? My mom died in 2019, 2 years before I entered seminary. And it feels important to say that by that time, my way of thinking about Alzheimer's had changed. The way personal experience tends to upend both my idealized dreams and my worst fears. Paula D'Arcy says, "God comes to you disguised as your life," which felt true here. But at the time, I lacked any language for any of it, and I knew dementia was not an isolated problem. It's a pervasive one, which probably is why my theology classes ended up being my very favorite in seminary. Because during times of upheaval, it helps to have some conversation partners who are willing to go deep. John Swinton, professor of practical theology at University of Aberdeen in Scotland and a nurse for many years, wrote a book called Dementia, living in the memories of God. He started not by defining God, but instead what it means to be a person. According to Swinton, personhood is often described in contemporary culture by our abilities. I think, therefore I am. I am because of what I can do. Or even the postmodernist, I am because I'm in relationship with others. All of these are beautiful human capacities, but they also put human identity at the hands of things that can deteriorate. Instead, Swinton's perspective of personhood from the gospel is, I am because I am created, dependent, gifted, and loved in all circumstances and for all time. Maybe some of you winced a little at the word dependent being in there. Wanted to at least replace it with interdependence. Like my mom, so many of us feel more ourselves when we focus on where we have agency. But it may help us in other ways to also consider and even befriend the ways we already are dependent. Swinton argues there isn't anything we have that wasn't given to us, beginning with life itself. And so I want to take just a moment to reflect. If you're comfortable closing your eyes, or just find a soft gaze in front of you, feel your feet on the floor, gravity holding us here, your breath coming into your lungs. Consider the ways you may have come here into this body on this earth, whether it's by a star dying and eventually becoming cells in your skin, or from a long line of ancestors whose love eventually became you, or God forming your inward parts, knitting you together in your mother's womb. Maybe all of these. And what keeps breath in our lungs right now? Isn't it trees and the grass outside? What keeps the thumping of our heart steady? Isn't it the deepest part of ourselves that knows the rhythm without our even trying? Neither height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God. If your eyes are closed, you may open them. Yes, Swinton says, dementia is a story of great losses. But for sufferers and their caregivers, the fullness of personhood and God's faithful love for them are not among those losses. There was another key moment when I was caring for my mom. This time we were in Maui, her favorite place on earth, and we had just enrolled her on hospice care. My husband John flew in, and the two of us went to the Big Island for 2 days as a getaway. We walked across this sharp black sand that cut my feet. It was created by lava fields. And while John surfed, I plopped down on my rectangle towel like a tiny island amid volcanic glass. And I felt the rising tide of grief well up in me. There's a kind of guilt, a sense of betrayal that often comes from grieving a loved one who is alive but changed. And I realized that this getaway for me was a time to fall apart in a way I could not when I was with my mom. Because while the losses were profound, there was also a whole person right in front of me who needed my strength and tenderness and care. Pauline Boss, a researcher and therapist who coined the term ambiguous loss, writes, with dementia, absence and presence coexist. Struggling too hard for clarity can lead to false answers. For instance, my spouse is gone, so I don't visit her anymore. Or denial, my spouse is just forgetful, and thus handing over the car keys to someone who is not capable to drive. Unless we consciously work hard to think about embracing ambiguity, any of us can easily fall into absolute thinking, Being in relationship with someone who has dementia means we must increase our tolerance, our capacity for ambiguity. This, I believe, is why we see so many people who have accompanied their own loved one to the end of this journey show up at Care Collective to volunteer. We know what is asked of family caregivers is too much for any one person to sustain over time, or even one family. The two themes that come up at every caregiver session I've held so far are loneliness and guilt. Alzheimer's is a disease of isolation, but it doesn't have to be. To have partners, extended family, church family, neighbors, to be in beloved community with our loved ones, even for a short time, can be a lifeline. Caregivers need time to lament, time to walk with a friend, time to fall apart. Probably time to go to the grocery store too. Learning to relate with someone with mid-stage dementia can take practice because it requires countercultural skills, like developing a new relationship with time, practicing presence and embodiment. But it's not without reward. Another reason many volunteer for Care Collective is because being in beloved community is also fun. Here's a clip from a recent care session. I was kind of hoping we'd all have time to get up and dance to that. So Swinton writes, if people act toward us in ways that remind us we are remembered, then we can see, feel, and touch God's memories in action. It is as we learn to meet people soul to soul that the practice of remembering finds flesh and potency. To continue to be in community with our neighbors who have dementia is possible and it's powerful. This isn't only true of dementia, of course. Sue's poem about her friend Kai, who became like a grandson through Sue's ministry of presence, is that same showing up, those same skills. And last week, Frosty's story about the emptiness of grief and the fullness of love being joined into one thing. For me, poetry often holds the paradox of grace better than any thesis. And for this one, and there is one poem titled Lost by David Wagner that always makes me think about that time with my mom and how I changed. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it like a powerful stranger. Must ask permission to know it and to be known. The forest breathes. Listen, it answers. I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. I have one more story about my mom before I close. The last month on hospice, my mom was not very active anymore, but she would still try and get out of bed in the middle of the night, and she was unsteady on her feet. So my dad and I would take turns getting up with her. One night was especially long, and as we made our pilgrimage from room to room, I finally started to see the stars fading into dawn. I led my mom into the kitchen where I made a cup of hazelnut coffee that she never drank anymore. She just set it in front of her. I carried the cup in one hand and guided her slowly towards the couch. She didn't want to sit. So we stood staring out at the water and the clear sky. "I feel lucky to be here," she said. "This place is so beautiful. How did you find it?" I realized she thought she was at my house. I said, "Dad found it. This is your home. You own this place." She looked at me, shook her head, said, "Oh, I don't think you can own this. I think God owns it." "You are right. We are lucky," I said. She nodded, but I could still tell she didn't quite know who I was. So I said, "It's okay if you don't remember this. You have an illness that jumbles up your memory sometimes, but I am your daughter." "Really?" she said, smiling. She reached and patted my arm, looked into my eyes. "I don't remember, but you feel familiar. I have a warm feeling towards you." And we stood, our arms touching, watching surfers straddling their boards, waiting for waves, the sky turning pale pink. And I felt as close to my mom as I ever had, maybe closer. Church family, thank you for welcoming the Care Collective into our big tent. May we continue to do the inner work that helps us to keep our minds and our hearts open, even when we feel lost or afraid. May we learn to love the stranger, even when that stranger is ourselves or a loved one in a new form. May we be the sanctuary, and may our collective care be a reflection of God's love in the world. Amen.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Boise First UCC podcast. We hope you found inspiration, encouragement, and a deeper connection to your faith and community. If you enjoyed today's conversation, we encourage you to subscribe, to leave a review, or share with your friends and family so that they can more quickly find us. Also, if you benefited from today's podcast, we invite you to make a donation at boisefirstucc.org/donate. Until next time, may you go in peace with curiosity and courage and a heart full of hope as we look toward our progressive Christian faith.